Greetings, loved ones. Today we're going to talk about detecting child abuse and neglect. Help us get these messages out. Please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit that like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages with others. You never know, you could save a life. So here are 4 points to think about today. 1, the child is always the victim. And although some laws in some areas permit corporal punishment in the home, school, and institution, number 2, excessive physical discipline is abuse. It's difficult to define excessive, but there are guidelines you can use. Physical discipline probably is excessive if it results in physical injury, including bruises, if it is inconsistent, arbitrary punishment designed not to educate but to instill fear, or the caretaker loses control during discipline. Also, it is inappropriate to the age of the child, and discipline is abuse if it is the result of unreasonable expectations or demands on the child by the caretaker. The 3rd point to think about is a perpetrator of child abuse or neglect can be any person who has care, custody, or control of the child at the relevant time. This could include parent, teacher, babysitter, or daycare staff person, relative, institution, bus driver, playground attendant, caretaker, boyfriend or girlfriend, or anyone with whom the child has contact. There are also instances when the parent or regular caretaker can be held responsible for abuse or neglect perpetrated by another. For example, when a parent allows the spouse to physically abuse their child, or when a child is left in inappropriate care and subsequently suffers abuse or neglect. And number 4, there are no simple answers. Abuse or neglect rarely occurs in clear, simple, and specific terms. Abuse or neglect usually results from complex combinations of a range of human situational factors. So let's talk about the abuser. What we know about ourselves and our behavior tells us that any of us might abuse or neglect our children. Many of us have felt at times that life is more than we can handle. But what stops us from giving up or lashing out are skills and mechanisms that we have learned to control or divert our anger, accept and assume adult responsibility, recognize realistic boundaries of acceptable behavior and expectation, and seek and accept help and support. When adults are faced with a situation which requires the use of coping skills that have not been developed, child abuse or neglect often results. Although this explanation is oversimplified, it does help us understand how abuse and neglect can occur. It also explains the term cycle of child abuse and neglect. Children learn from their parents. A child who has been raised in a home where violence is an accepted response to frustration will, as an adult, tend to react violently. The skills necessary for controlling anger or frustration are never learned. What is learned is violence. In the same way, a parent who lacks self-esteem or maturity cannot instill these characteristics within his child. Without significant outside influences, the child is likely to become an adult who perceives himself and life in the same manner as his parents do. This is the cycle of child abuse and neglect. Adults tend to repeat the actions and attitudes that they learn as children. We can identify many skills as essential for good parenting and use them to identify families who may be experiencing problems of abuse or neglect. Frequently, adults who abuse or neglect children share characteristics that reflect their failure to learn these skills. But we must remember, however, that child abuse and neglect is a multifaceted problem created through a mix of many ingredients, each unique and as complex as the individuals involved. An indicator of child abuse and neglect is a clue to a child's possible need. As with any clue, it is only a small piece that must be fitted into a larger picture. Adults who abuse or neglect children usually will share several of the following general characteristics. There's isolation. A shoulder to cry on or a friend to lean on are things most of us need, but adults who abuse or neglect children often do not have this support. They are isolated physically and emotionally from family, friends, neighbors, and organized groups. They may discourage social contact and rarely will participate in school or community activities. Then there's the poor self-concept. Many of these adults perceive themselves as bad, worthless, or unlovable. Children of parents with a poor self-concept often are regarded by their parents as deserving of abuse or neglect because they see their children as reflections of themselves. They view abuse and neglect as behavior that is expected of them. And then there's immaturity. This characteristic may be reflected in many ways, such as impulsive behavior, using the child to meet the adult's own emotional or physical needs, a constant craving for change and excitement. And then the other thing could be a lack of parenting knowledge. Many times abuse or neglect results because the adult does not understand the child's developmental needs. Society expects people to know the rights and wrongs of parenthood. But parenthood is a complex and a difficult job. Abusive parents often are strict disciplinarians who are frustrated from unmet expectations. These parents tend to place unrealistic demands upon their children and view their child's inability to perform as willful, deliberate disobedience. Then there's the issue of substance abuse. It has not been clearly established whether substance abuse is a causative or resulting factor. However, studies consistently have shown a correlation between the misuse of drugs or alcohol and the occurrence of abuse and neglect. Then there's lack of interpersonal skills. The abusive or neglectful adult often has not learned to interact with people. How to form relationships or socialize and work together are skills that we learn in childhood. And then there are unmet emotional needs. Often the abusive or neglectful parent has not met the basic emotional needs, which we all share: warmth, support, and love. Unable to provide the child with these feelings, which let us grow and mature, they will instead seek fulfillment from the child. The adult may express these characteristics through different attitudes or actions, and certain adult behaviors and attitudes can be correlated with the occurrence of specific types of abuse or neglect. According to the CDC, over half of all the children in the world, let me repeat that, according to the CDC, over half of all the children in the world, that's 1 billion children ages 2 to 17, experience violence every year. The question is not if you'll encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice. And if you're a victim of violence, please reach out to someone today. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help. If you know of a child or other person suffering violence, tell the authorities. In our next episode, we will talk about indicators of child abuse and neglect. Until then, God bless you.